Right, so it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's World Christianity Seminar run in conjunction with the Center for World Christianity Worldwide and the Faculty of Divinity. My name is Jörg Haustein. I'm Associate Professor in World Christianities here in the faculty. And it's my great pleasure to welcome my colleague and friend, Heike Raphael Hernandez from Würzburg in Germany, where she's Associate Professor in American Studies. Heike studied English, History, and German in Heidelberg, then did a master's in English in Louisville, Kentucky. I don't know if you're gonna lay on Louisville, sorry. Don't know if you're gonna lay on some of that southern accent for us, but we'll see. And then you did your PhD in English on Ernst Bloch's Principle of Hope and its reception among African American women. So you're waiting for where the World Christianity bit is coming, and that is actually in conjunction with her habilitation. She'll tell us a little bit more about this. I've known Heike for quite a few years. We used to go to the same church in Heidelberg, and I knew her as an Americanist, so we never really talked about work much until we discovered some years ago that we're working on very similar things, which was all about German entanglements and slavery, and you've published a volume in that among many of the other publications. And a lot of this was then tied with your work on Moravians and missions. So it's a real pleasure to welcome you here to Cambridge to hear more about your work on Moravians and missions. Welcome, Heike, and we're looking forward to your paper.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I mean, for me, it's really a pleasure. I mean, how Jörg said, we go back a long time and we were still something like young academics, not knowing where we end up in life. But we have always kept discussions and ideas and what are you doing right now? What am I doing? And it's correct. And several years ago, we actually discovered that we have something like joint research interests, and that is about as Germany and German. We use the word entanglement and transatlantic slavery, and entanglement, you will also see what I'm doing today is actually something. Oh, I see my son. It's a pleasure as a mom. It's a hi, Marcus. So what I'm doing here is, let me see if I go to the, do you have to take that further? Okay, yeah, no, I see, it's fine, I have that one. Later, just later, close that. Okay, good. All right. And you actually asked about it. You don't even know. I mean, how I like stumbled into that. Again, my research interests and also a lot of publications have something to do with transatlantic slavery and also German involvement. And for Germany, that's I mean, I'm standing here in Great Britain. There's no question about what's the involvement in transatlantic slavery. For Germany, it was always like nothing, because there was no Germany, so no entanglement in transatlantic slavery. But by now also, it's this idea, there was a lot of entanglement, and it's a question of what we actually today call German-speaking territories, and in many, many different ways. There are really like lots of entanglements and involvement. And I had for 1 year a guest professorship in the African diaspora department at Berkeley University. And one of my colleagues there, he is a professor for African history, came and said, you know that there in Bethlehem in Pennsylvania, there's an archive from the German church, it's in American, as they're called Moravians, in German we call them Herrnhuter. And he said that there is like tons of material, archival material, like from the 18th century, 17th century, but we cannot read it, but you're German, can you do that for us? And then I like, do you see this one in the middle? Okay, fine, one on the side I can read, Jacob, Paulina, Natana, and then it stops there. And then the other ones, okay, I can read Memorial vom Jahr 1766, Friedenstal, St. Paul's, and unser Schließe. And it was really, that's a joke, yeah, like only because I'm German, I'm doing this for you guys. And I actually went there for a day and I said, okay, I will look at that, yeah, because it is my native language. And also like asking my mom whether she can like read this old, and she said, this is not what we learned in school, don't even try that. Yeah. And then I was there, and if you have done archival research, it's not just the way how they write it, it's also the material. Now, I mean, you hardly can touch it, and then you see this with the one in the middle, it's bleeding through from the other side, so you don't even know which word belongs to this side and which to the other side. And it was really for me, forget it. I'm honest. Do this yourself. Yeah, that's not what I'm doing. That's not what I'm interested in. But then, you know, like when you then leave and then you think like, wait a second, I was just standing somewhere, German missionaries, 1728, and I'm walking away because I say I'm not able to read that. And so then I went back and I actually even took a course. I mean, a course how to read archival material and how to read. Just, I mean, for me that was like, this is not German. Of course it's German. And then really to sit there and it's something. I mean, you might know this too. At some point you get hooked. And then you say, okay, I'm not leaving this archive anymore for the rest of my life. You can lock me into this room from time to time. I want water and bread. That's all I need. And it's really a fascination. And because the Moravians, as far as the Herrnhuter, I mean, Germany, I don't know, is the Losung, is it something, is it so like German?
It's a daily scripture kind of thing.
The daily scripture, I mean, for us, I mean, I grew up with this. It's and still today, I mean, the Losung, that's something we live with this. And it was, so I always knew them, and I thought like, but now as an academic interest to do something with that. And I really started this and talked to colleagues who had worked a little bit with this. And I did something, the research, I have published material from this, and I want to simply introduce several of the ideas to you. I will, in between, I will read, and from time to time I talk. I hope that because of reading, it's more focused when I do this. Yeah. Okay, I'm inviting you. We are starting. I'm taking you to the Caribbean. We go to St. Thomas. It's the year 1737. Yeah. In 1737, on the Caribbean island of St. Thomas, a slave woman about to be sexually violated by one of the plantation overseers pulled out a Bible and read to him about his sin and the eternal punishment he would receive by the laws of the white man, his religion. According to the report about this incident found in the Moravian missionary documents of 1737, her act caused him to relent. In another document, a letter from 1739, 7 slaves wrote in the name of 650 black scholars of Jesus Christ to the Danish king Christian VI. In their letter, they protested about the plantation owners' continued harassment and mistreatment of the Moravian missionaries who were working among the slaves, along with recounting how plantation owners have burned the slaves' spelling books and how some slaves have even had their ears and feet cut off as a punishment for reading the Bible. The 7 slaves specifically objected to the incarceration of 2 white missionaries and asked the king to show his mercy and grace by interfering with their imprisonment. At the same time, they also wrote letters of encouragement to their brown brothers and sisters. These would be Native American Moravians in Pennsylvania. In addition to these documents, the Moravian archival material includes Lebensläufe that can be regarded as small autobiographies that all Moravian members, white, black, and brown, wrote or dictated during the course of their lives, and that were intended to be read at their funerals as their last words and greetings to the congregation. Let me see whether I actually did this. I mean, here you see something that said these are these autobiographies, the Lebensläufe. You see the book, right? The challenge. Like I said, like, I'm not reading that. I need to be locked away in a room if I'm on. This is the that you see these letters to also meine lieben Brüder und Schwestern in Bethlehem. Ich grüße euch alle mit dem Gruß. And it was something, you know, when you see this, this is perfect German. I mean, it's not just about writing. And of course, the next question then are, I'm talking about enslaved Africans, yeah, on plantations, and really living through this extremely brutal time. Yeah. And what is it? What am I looking at here? Like, I mean, even today we would often say, like, we would wish that lots of people would have such a wonderful, grammatically correct German. There's what is it? What am I looking at here? But then we also have something. Do you see this? The other one, it's in English, written by Marotta Magdalena from Popo in Africa. And then the next one is Count Zinzendorf's farewell letter wrote. And something. So why do we then have these letters also in English in the archive? And what is this? And what are we actually looking at here? And it's something. Of course, I mean, we all know as academics, I mean, we have to be extremely careful what we're looking at. And often the danger is, I mean, we, from our perspective, sometimes we wish that we read something there, and that we put certain wishes and desires into material we find, and then hope that enough people back us up, so that we say, okay, green light, we think we found something. So again, it's the idea to be careful with this, what we see, but it's then again also working with other colleagues, scholars in interdisciplinary ways, divinity scholars, African American scholars. I mean, this idea of what do we actually have here for this time, and let me see whether this for example, that's this letter. Do you see this here? A letter of the awakened Negroes in St. Thomas wrote to His Majesty the King. And actually we say in transatlantic slavery studies, this is doing something else. So it is something that we say, okay, we do have to be careful, what is it, but to sit together and say, we actually always thought that we do know the slave codes for the Caribbean, and the slave code said that nobody is allowed to teach someone, enslaved people are not allowed to read or to write, because of course we know the person who can read and write also knows more than the person who's not able to do that. No? Actually, I had this here, let me see. Okay, let me see. So for our Moravians, let me see, let me skip this here. The early period, so I wanted to show you something, and I mean, I have another one too for the next one, but for the Caribbean, you see this here, I mean, this is actually really more what we say today, this idea of the transatlantic slave trade and transatlantic slavery. We see this here, that it's not that we say, okay, like 3 countries and we are done. We say, I mean, this was every player in Europe participated in that, and in totally different ways. I mean, of course, the next question is then always, I mean, what we thought, in what language did they actually all work? And I mean, one colleague said, you know, if it's about profit, it doesn't matter which language people speak, then, but I mean, that was like one of the first things where we said, like, okay, and the Caribbean, I mean, at this time, so we are in the early 18th century, and Suriname, I also want to include this because that's also a very, very important part for the time. What I want to do is, and I want to single out only something like 3 decades for the Moravian missionaries there, because how I also will show you the Moravian missionaries after that, it's always, you know, with whom are you breaking your bread? So the missionaries at some point in Suriname, in North Carolina, in South Carolina, in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, somehow discovered that at the table of the slave-owning master, the food is better than to sit with the enslaved people in the hut and break bread. But the early period, when we say something like the first half of the 18th century, has something that there's something different. And it is something also, you know, like the 18th century, for German history, we say the 18th century was something, I mean, Enlightenment came later, 19th century, I mean, this idea of to really change something what we used to have. And my idea was, and also with colleagues together, we said the idea of the early Moravians working with these enslaved people in the Caribbean and Suriname changed something that so far probably did in a secular realm, not just in the whatever in Christian context, but also in the secular realm, changed something that must have meant so much more for this idea to dream about freedom for enslaved Africans, but also for people in Europe. Okay, good. Let's see. The early period between the 1730s and 1760s differed from all subsequent periods of Moravian missionary presence because the majority of the first Moravian missionaries to the Caribbean and Suriname came from Germany's lowest classes. Among their listed job descriptions, one finds an overwhelming number of potters, carpenters, tailors, blacksmiths, bricklayers, and shoemakers. The idea of sending such tradespeople was a pragmatic one because the missionaries had to be financially independent from Europe and had to support themselves with the work they could find in the island, finding employment and trained scholars of theology, who were usually members of higher classes. This fact helps to understand why the home community at the headquarters in Hernandez in Saxonia, today's Germany, did not have problems with sending the non-scholars to the mission field, that is, the plain and uneducated brothers and sisters who were to carry out one of the most important tasks of Moravian essence, taking God's word to all corners of the world. Germany at that time was arranged into a Ständegesellschaft, which meant that individuals belonged to groups that were determined mainly by birth and were organized around a hierarchy of prestige that was arranged according to legal and social criteria. While I do not want to imply that the living conditions of lower classes in German territories can be compared at all to the inhumane suffering of the enslaved Africans in the Caribbean, for my idea, it is important to note that the German system included forms of unfreedom that was based on a heritage, which among other factors limited a person's right to move, to marry, or to do certain kinds of work. The early missionaries' secular class belonging might have caused them to find more of a common ground with the enslaved than with their own, often aristocratic Moravian church leaders back at home. It is with these two rather strange groups, the lower class German missionaries and the enslaved Africans, that I detect a critical nexus of spiritual matters which secular empowerment that carried an ideological potential for both groups. I want to show this with three different ideas. Let me see. Oops, yeah, here you can see this, yeah. Okay, what really was the idea that was not part of the mission directive, what they were supposed to do. These ideas, and I want to give you like examples also from the material we found. Literacy for the enslaved, encouragement to legal and verbal protest, and the invalidation of white people's assumed God-given superiority. Let's do this. Let's see, a little bit of an historical background to understand the growing secular awareness of the right of freedom by enslaved people via the early Moravians and vice versa. One has to start with the Moravians' historical and spiritual background. The Moravians were a Protestant group that traced their spiritual origins back to the Czech reformer Jan Hus. Because of their open theological opposition to state church doctrines, they were branded as heretics in their home territory of Moravia. In 1722, when they fled from Moravia to Saxony to escape religious persecution, Count Ludwig von Zinzendorf gave them part of his estate in Hernwood in Upper Saxonia, as today it's Saxonia. Zinzendorf was raised in the spirit of German pietism and had a strong interest in foreign evangelism. He chose this group of refugees to found the Hernwooder community. In English, they are known as the Moravians to emphasize their older connection to Jan Hus. The group's international missionary attempts began with their Caribbean mission in the Danish West Indies in 1732. This was later followed by additional missionary activities in Suriname, Berbice, Greenland, Jamaica, South Africa, Siberia, Sri Lanka, and other ones. In addition, they worked among Native Americans in Pennsylvania and New York State, among enslaved Africans in North Carolina, and among Jewish people in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands. The Caribbean mission began in 1732 when two men, Leonard Dober, a potter, and David Nitschmann, a carpenter, arrived on the island of St. Thomas. By that time, slavery was already well established. Large institutions in the Caribbean and several European nations participated as global players in its transatlantic economy. Christian theology presented a tool for this institution. A variety of the different state churches participated fully in the maintenance of slavery by preaching submission and acceptance of faith to the enslaved Africans, but otherwise did not care at all for them as fellow human beings. Since the two Moravian missionaries wanted to bring a different Christian message to the enslaved, but a personal and unsupervised contact with the enslaved seemed impossible, because of the plantation system and its regulations, the two men tried to sell themselves into slavery. Although this attempt failed, because as they were told, slavery would not be a system for white people, it also gained them an immediate reputation of being religious troublemakers. In addition, their action resulted in violent hostility towards them, not only from white planter society, but also from white working class members, a violence that many subsequent missionaries also had to face as part of their daily lives in the Danish West Indies. Despite these problems, or perhaps because of these problems, the two men were able to slowly gain the enslaved people's trust. In the diary, one finds many entries that report about visits of slaves on a variety of plantations, as well as visits the missionaries received from the enslaved people in their own home. 2 years later, in 1734, two more missionaries, Friedrich Martin and Matthäus Freundlich, joined the two and extended the mission to the islands of St. John. Later that year, 18 additional Moravians, 14 men and 4 women arrived, but went immediately to the island of St. Croix to start an additional mission. Over the following decades, many more Moravians arriving from Saxony joined these early missionaries. From the very start, these Moravians had to deal with tremendous poverty, physical violence, and climate conditions in all these islands they were not used to. Factors that contributed to an exceptionally high rate of mortality among their members. For example, from the first group of 18 members that started the missionary work in 1734, 11 died during the first year of malnutrition and diseases that they had no means of curing. Many others got lost at sea during their voyages from Europe to the West Indies. Yet despite all these obstacles, by 1738, the missionaries could already count some 600 converts in St. Thomas alone among the enslaved Africans. The mission in Suriname began with a small group of Moravians in 1735. Unlike their counterparts in the Danish West Indies, this group's initial intention for their travel was not the start of another missionary outpost. Instead, Suriname was rather a geographical compromise because their leader, Count von Zinzendorf, had been expelled from Hernwood in Saxony, and the group had to find a new place where they eventually could settle as a religious community. Since missionary activities overseas had already become a priority at that time, Suriname was one of the several places they discussed as a potential home for the new Hanhood. And the arriving small group can be considered a scouting group for a future residential consideration. By the 1730s, Suriname was infamously known for its large slave community and the planters' exceptional brutality towards the enslaved people. Because of this brutality and Suriname's geographical opportunities with its partly inaccessible mountainous interior, Suriname population included also a recognizable large group of runaway enslaved people, also known as Maroons. By 1750, the number of Maroons was estimated to be about 6,000. Many of their members had already been born in Marrakesh. After arrival in 1735, the first Moravians intended their missionary task to take place only among the indigenous people. The growing missionary activity among enslaved Africans happened rather as a side effect. Later, in the 1760s, they also began missionary work among the different Maroon communities. Soon after the first small missionary successes, they were officially asked to accept a variety of postmaster positions, which were go-between positions that were supposed to help establish peaceful relations between the Dutch local government and the Maroons. Let's see this here. Okay, to know about this, for the Moravians, that they really practiced something what they call New Testament Christianity. For example, they had, also not just, they're inside the community, they really live this. And so for just some ideas, understand this, they practice cross-racial and cross-class equality inside the church community. And this can also be seen in the way they address each other. You might have seen this in the letters I showed you. Moravians, white as well as black members, express there is respect for each other by addressing each other with brother and sister. They write about Brother Petrus, Bruder Abraham, Bruder Johannes, Bruder Cornelius. In a few letters the archives hold that were written by black members, the writers sign with these brotherly and sisterly titles of love, respect, and belonging. They, Bruder Cornelius, sent their greetings to Bruder Nathanael and Bruder Johann. Afro-Moravian Isaac and his Rebecca, Nathanael, Jacob, Paulina sent their affectionate greetings to all brothers and sisters in the church community. When white missionaries write about them in reports and letters, they always include them with dear, such as in Our Dear Black Sisters of the Peter de Win plantation, or it is a blessing to work among the dear black people. When one considers that black men still protested, I hope I get this for you, can you see this? Yeah, no? When one considers that black men still protested their being addressed as boy and carried signs that stated, I am a man, during the civil rights marches in the 20th century, one can only guess how influential these respectful titles and addresses alone must have been for the enslaved Africans that were part of the Moravian community in the early 18th century. It is important to note that this inside that church community equally did not only serve the Afro-Moravian members as visions of a world to come, simultaneously the presence of their black members was of essential importance to white Moravians too, because for the very first time, white people, even if this was only limited to the Moravian community, learned to practice cross-class and cross-racial communities. I want to show you this now, like this one idea literacy, but the first point we have here. This idea of what the early missionaries, where they actually then did something that was not really what the headquarters in Germany wanted them to do. Okay, let's see. One example of an aspect that began with spiritual intentions but turned into secular empowerment can be seen in this enslaved and missionaries' joint attitude toward literacy. The missionaries, who often had only rudimentary levels of literacy themselves, taught the enslaved to read and write. admittedly with the primary goal of studying Holy Scripture, because according to pietist notions, one has to be able to read the Bible oneself in order to engage with God's Word regularly in small weekly discussion groups. However, with the idea of enabling the slaves to read and write, the missionaries came into conflict with the official Danish slave code for the islands that forbade literacy for enslaved people. The planter society knew all too well that Bible-reading slaves would become aware of white Christian hypocrisy. In addition, it is important to note that while the Missionaries' Act might not have violated Moravian theology, they definitely acted against the secular rules that leader Count von Zinzendorf had set up for the mission field. This becomes obvious by Zinzendorf's reaction to the idea. In a letter of 1736 to another missionary group in Siberia, Zinzendorf wrote, "Under no circumstances involve yourself in external affairs other than missionary work. The brethren on St. Thomas are teaching the Moors to write. We are disapproving of this completely. One can arouse the anger of the authorities with such small things." Let me see. One repeated, but the interesting part is that the missionaries and enslaved people, whatever, like the headquarters were saying, they did something else, understanding the power of literacy. One repeatedly finds in the letters and diaries of the missionaries that many slaves seem only to be coming to the Christian meeting in order to learn to read and write. They will not sit still and listen when they learn about the blood that Christ sacrificed for them. It is reported, but instead seem to want to hurry the missionaries up to get to the part where they teach them how to spell. The missionaries' reaction shows that most of them were rather torn between their support of the enslaved people's desire and their own wish to bring first and foremost the Christian message to them. In their text, the missionaries frequently expressed their concern that many slaves seem to be interested in literacy only for secular gains. One measure introduced to prevent this problem was moving the spelling instructions to the latter part of the evening after Bible instructions, hoping that this would deter all but the very sincere from attending. At a certain point, the missionaries even tried limiting these spelling sessions to those who were close to being converted. Yet all this was to no avail. The enslaved indeed had discovered the secular power of literacy. The belief that literacy was to hold the key to secular white society's power structure could also be observed in Suriname. The archival material for Suriname includes several reports about maroon chiefs who asked the Moravian missionaries to educate their children, but otherwise showed zero interest in the missionaries' Christian work. Still, even if several missionaries worried that they were taken advantage of by the enslaved, and even if many enslaved and Maroons saw that they were being lured into Christianity via learning how to read and write, both groups, missionaries and enslaved, in obvious cooperation, used literacy for secular empowerment in their respective circumstances. This claim can be illustrated with the example of the slaves' use of passes during slave revolts. While official Moravian church policies urged their members not to get involved in protests or even in slave revolts, the written discourse about these events allow one to speculate about how a creative protest could have taken place. In the documents in the archive, one reads repeatedly about slave uprisings, about rumors of slave revolts, and about planters who in panic forbade slaves from leaving their plantations. Together with white Moravians, the enslaved Moravian members often asked for exception passes so that they would be able to attend church meetings after dark. Especially evening meetings could cause slaves to return after dark were regarded as suspicious activities by plantation owners. Being fully aware of the planters' fears, Moravians wrote passes for hundreds of slaves, and one can only speculate that they were not used exclusively for attending church in the evening in town. If you see that the attendance then had not hundreds of people for church in the evening. In one planter's diary, one is able to find a report about a particular incident when slaves were not allowed to leave the plantations because of the rumor of a slave revolt. Nevertheless, as the planter records, he saw at least 200 black people on their way to church in St. Thomas. that was one of this, where they really said, like, keep these Moravians off the island. And then the Danish king was asked to do this, but other ones came. Yeah, okay. Then we find also another example that the white Moravians actually tasked one of the black Moravians who was still a slave himself, and that told him, said, you know what, you just write all the passes and we don't check. And it is actually really, we have this in historical documents, that Mingo was his name. He wrote so many slave passes because in the Caribbean it's islands, no? So you could actually take a slave pass and then go and write whatever you write, go to the next island, and the next island you could actually say you're a free person from that. And it's obvious that the missionaries knew about that, and they always got quite in anger with this. Let's see. Something with, I mean, one of the most interesting parts is, perhaps I don't read this, I just tell you this, is in Suriname it was actually able, not St. Thomas, that was not possible. In Suriname it was actually able that if a planter was extremely brutal or an overseer was extremely brutal, and Suriname was extremely brutal, how they handle that. That in theory, that's Netherlands, that the judge of local authority says that an enslaved person could complain about that treatment. But of course, I mean, you know, like how slavery works, I mean, if it's a very brutal society, you don't dare to go there. And the missionaries, the white missionaries actually encouraged them and said, I help you and I go with you. And I will make sure that you will not be stopped by the judge, that I will stand next to you. And if the judge always knew the missionary was not standing there as a witness, but as a protective person, that the judge knew if you send that person back, that person will be, the enslaved person will be dead the next day. So do something about it, protect that. And of course, I mean, you see this, how this is also a very limited time that we see it as a white planter society knows how to take care of this at some point and say, you cannot do that. And that's rebel encouragement. And one of the missionaries in Suriname, I mean, one judge said, why do you do this? I mean, like, you know that they beat you up too, even if you're a white person, why would you do this? And I said, if you really read the Bible, you wouldn't even ask that question. I mean, that you really have this as one. Let me see this here. The last one, I mean, it's the examples that I have here, like, I was reading this to you, know, the woman who pulls actually out the Bible and says, I mean, if you continue to do this, it's hell for eternity, and if we still have people who believe in you're burning in hell for eternity, and then okay, no, then something like this. But the interesting part is what we see in Suriname and in St. Thomas, that actually that the missionaries told the enslaved people, I mean, that they really told them, you know, like, this is also for white people, what they're doing, this is sin. Yeah, that it's not just what you do, this is really sin, and they actually know this. That's the other part, they know that this is sin. And so something, what we do have also in text and also what missionaries talked about, other missionaries when they were visiting and then in the mission field, something, I mean, this, I think this is one of the largest points, that white missionaries give something to enslaved Africans to help them understand that there is no superiority of white people. And that's something like, I mean, we're talking about time 1730, 1740 now, where things change later. But something also what, I mean, a larger research we're doing also about, I mean, like this idea of how to abolish slavery, how to not just the slave trade was abolished in the beginning of the 19th century, but also to abolish slavery. And I mean, this idea, and it does come, a lot of these ideas, it goes really hand in hand. Yeah, is it possible also to that really see to say like they might say this, that they're superior, but I mean, if you really listen to them, what is really important for their soul and their understanding? I mean, they do know that they're not superior and that they actually have like that sinning what they're doing, and take that knowledge and do something with that knowledge. And we see this then actually really in so many different ways. I mean, how it's like working hand in hand, and we also know about, the Quakers, I mean, how they also really work together with these ideas. I mean, really like hand in hand working together for this idea. There is also something, don't say it's for eternity, it's also for this world. We do need like an equality or not a superiority. I stop.
Thanks so much, Michael.